Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a music podcast where a group of friends gather together like a little book club for music, share music with each other, an album at a time. It's like sharing, caring. You know, we all take turns. I'm Petey Rave, and you can call me a schnitzel. Is it a shih tzu? I don't know. I was gonna say call me a dog joke, but I don't know where it went. Here with me is my team, my squad, my crew, my quorum. We've got David.
I had a late night Windows reinstall and lost my notes.
Mm-hmm. We've got Drew.
Hey, folks. I'm glad my voice doesn't sound like it has since Sunday, which was mostly like the guy who sang Funky Cold Medina, Tone Loc.
Yes.
I just started sounding normal this morning.
Yes. And of course, we've got Brett.
I'm hungry for a tenderloin that's been hammered and breaded and schnitzeled all up.
Mm-hmm. I can go for a tenderloin sandwich right now. We're here to talk about music. We're going to talk about an album. The provider.
The tenderloin sandwich talk is later.
Yes.
Stick around.
Right. Huntington, Indiana.
I'm going to school about broadcast writing. That is something that's called the tease. Tease, and then you go to the graphics and you come back to the anchor.
I got you.
The provider of the album this week is Brett. Brett, what have you got for us this week?
Well, you'll find that out after sports and these messages. But no, so like I'm bringing a Chris Cornell super group. This time it's some of the guys from Pearl Jam hanging out with the self-titled album from 1991 from Temple of the Dog.
Yeah. Some of the guys soon to be from Pearl Jam, which is kind of a weird, awesome thing. Let's talk about some expectations. David, what were your expectations coming into this album?
This one was, as I like to say, another layup for me. I am already well versed in this album and the works of all parties involved, and this episode of Record Breakers is just going to be another opportunity for me to gush about Chris Cornell.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's always welcome to have opportunities to gush about Chris Cornell. Drew, what were your expectations coming into this album?
So, this was not a layup for me. This was what was the name of this band? Record for me. I had not heard of these. I've not heard of this band. I shouldn't say I haven't heard of these guys, because the people that make up the band, you very much have heard of. But they joined together in this way, I had not. So I was excited to get into it once I was like, oh, it's most of Pearl Jam plus Cornell plus Eddie Vedder? Alright, let's go with this route then.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens here.
Yeah, this is interesting because it was like I hadn't sat down to listen to this album. I'd heard of obviously the group, and I knew of the group, and I remember the song, and we've heard the song, and we're gonna talk about that later. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at this group because it's like it's what was going to be Pearl Jam after they had just kind of like out of the fallout of their previous band, with Chris Cornell saying, "Hey, got these songs." So it's interesting to kind of go back to this, but not to take Brett's content in the describing this album, but yeah, it's an interesting album to go back to. Brett, how would you describe this album musically?
Oh, I mean, like, there are so many familiar sounds that come out of this album from the very start. And even aside from the vocals, I mean, it's got that swimmy modulated guitar that we heard on both the Soundgarden and Audio Slave albums that we covered. It's kind of a thing. There's that like strange like modulated reverbed out like sound, but there's a lot of blues influence on this album, and not just like blanket blues, like, oh, those guys they're doing the thing. No, there's like three distinct varieties. You got like almost Stevie Ray Vaughan esque, which would be almost contemporary. You have like the modern Western film soundtrack sounds of blues, and you have some straight up wah guitar solo like Hendrix going on, along with songs that have like piano and organ and a drum kit with brushes. Like it's a lot of things that you in their pieces you would think, oh, this will not sound like the music of the guys who are making it, because those instruments and the way they make them are different. But when you put it all together, you're like, oh, this is if these guys were going to do this is that.
Yeah.
It's very definitely, it sounds like a side project of a lot of people who wear flannel shirts and live in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. David, how would you describe this album musically?
I succinctly wrote down in my notes before my PC decided it needed to have Windows reinstalled. There are definitely moments all over this album that you could describe as proto Pearl Jam, for obvious reasons, given that a couple of the members of the band in Pearl Jam that would eventually write 10 are on this album. The things that Brett said, you will hear blues and soul sprinkled all over this. And on top of that, you hear Chris Cornell singing in a much different way than you would have heard him on Bad Motorfinger or Super Unknown, the Soundgarden albums that would have come out before and after this, but still just absolutely phenomenal as a vocalist. You hear him vocalizing and singing in ways that rock vocalists were not doing around this time very much. And it's really, really cool, and it's really a testament to him as a singer. And he's damn good at it. Composition-wise, this goes places, and it goes some really, really cool places. And I'll talk about the really, really cool places it goes when we talk about the tracks we like. Pedro?
Drew, how would you describe this album musically?
So yes, this is a grunge record, which is weird, because I'm usually not like a huge fan, of grunge, but the steal of the show is obviously Cornell. Like, his vocal is something that I think transcends the genre. I think I've said this before about him. He's one of those vocalists that you sort of have to sit up and take notice from. But it doesn't mean it's the only thing. The music is prettier than I think a lot of the music that came out of either of the bands that sort of joined up here. Which is also strange for me to say. You don't think of grunge as a pretty music. There's a slowness to this, probably because of the subject matter of the lyrics, that gives way to very, I think, more interesting melodies than you get with some other grunge records, while it's still feeling like a product of its parts in ways. You don't lose their identity. It's just that it's different. Like Brett said, they're deciding to do something very different than they decided to do later on. And I think that's something that's, I think, really commendable. there's an 11-minute song that isn't boring, which is also strange for me to say with this. Like, when you see the box quote being, hey, it's a grunge record by these people who you like from these other grunge bands, it's like, oh, well, okay. 11 minutes on one song, it's great.
It's fine.
Eddie Vedder's on the album. That's okay. Grunge was always this weird emotional offshoot of the Seattle scene, right? And if you look at the lyrics of a lot of those bands and a lot of those contemporaries, they deal with a lot of dark subject matter. I mean, some of Nirvana's flat out titles of songs were pretty bad. Be honest, but the thing about that is that I always felt like the music decidedly took a different turn, where it was almost hiding how sad some of the lyrics and some of the subject matter really was. This put it all out on display, from the lyrics to the music to everything. It doesn't care. It knows the hand it's been dealt, and it's ready to deal with that. And I think Cornell's writing in this and how the band plays that out, I think is really, really well done.
Yeah. I think in music it's really cool. It's an interesting peek into like this odd transition point, because theoretically it was done before Bad Motorfinger. I think the release dates were a little bit different, but so they had been mostly doing a very heavy sound in Soundgarden, and it makes me want to go back and check out Mother Love Bone as a group.
Yeah,
because I think it's very it's cited as being kind of very like I think even in the Wikipedia it's spoken like their theatrical 70s rock updates, which is like the 70s rock feel is what you feel in some of these moments, as well as like the bluesy stuff. And it's cool because it's like it's an odd mix of like what they were used to doing, what this one person was kind of like deviating out to try out because he wasn't really doing it with his main group, and what they were almost like nascent in them about what they were going to create going forward, in short time with Pearl Jam that they were planning, because Eddie was around, obviously, because he was able to provide some vocals. But it was like this interesting like glimpse into this, what had to have been crazy, tumultuous, weird couple of years, fueled by like grief and a creative surge that was probably fueled by grief, at least partially. And it's an interesting like look at a moment in time, musically, on top of like what you all said about like the actual musical compositions. It's just like an interesting like glimpse into musical time. Brett, let's talk about some of the key tracks. What would be some of the key tracks to zero in on?
Well, I mean, there were singles that were on that were successful. Well, at least two of them charted on this album, and I remember hearing one of them more than the other, but "Say Hello to Heaven." Like this album opens up with like almost it sounds like, oh, it's like, is somebody put the Soundgarden album on? Like it's got that jangly warble that you've heard a million times in Black Hole Sun, and it opens up, and boy, it's just a blues track with big vocals for all the opening. Hunger Strike on the is completely different, saying that you have a song that has been played to death on the radio up to today, but like with Hunger Strike, it's you've got the number one example of the world's most overqualified backup singer, and somehow still able to do it. and it's probably my favorite thing that Eddie Vedder has ever touched, which is, a song he didn't write, and kind of it's early. It's also, Hunger Strike is one of those.
Still had his voice.
Yeah, yeah. Hunger Strike also reminds me that there is a perfect karaoke duet for anyone who can find someone who can do Chris Cornell.
Yes.
Because everybody in the world can do an Eddie Vedder almost as good as Eddie Vedder. It's like one of those universal, like, I'm singing like a guy. And a Hunger Strike is almost all to blame for that. Because it's kind of a subdued song. The album, it closes out in a very it closes out in a way that is very different, but like in the same way that you have to think, that guy from the Soundgarden and the guy who made that James Bond opening track are the same guy. The All Night Thing reminds you that you make things occur. Sound happens, and it doesn't matter what tools you use. You'll get that Chris Cornell wrote this song vibe out of it. So I really enjoyed how, like, there's so much variety in the way that these songs sound, because it is kind of scattershot all the way through, but from front to back it is all the same formula, but it came out, it was put in the oven at different temperatures. It was it's very, very odd, especially seeing that we know 20 some years of what happened after this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to kind of go back to it. David, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Reach Down. Oh my god, this song. Especially in the latter half of the song, where it's Chris Cornell doing an a cappella over a layered vocal. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Four Walled World. The hook and the chorus on this song was absolutely fantastic. Also, you will hear what I mentioned as kind of a proto Pearl Jam song, maybe, on Pushing Forward Back. I think you'll hear a lot of proto Pearl Jam, pre-Pearl Jam moments all over this album, but I think Pushing Forward Back is definitely one of them. And I just, in general, for no real reason, Times of Trouble. I just liked that one.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
So I didn't have, again, it's something I never heard, so I didn't have a idea of what the singles were, but Say Hello to Heaven. The weird thing to me about this one is it almost has a touch of like a country song to it for some reason. Which, look, I'm here for. Grunge country is not something I knew I really wanted. But I'm down. Also, the solo, like right around 3:40, starts out with this like growly low tone to the guitar, which was like super cool, and I don't know what that effect exactly was or what the hell they were doing, but it was dope. The Eddie and Chris mix on Hunger Strike is awesome. Like, there's no other way to put it. Yes, everyone and their mother has done an Eddie Vedder. There have been bands that have
hundreds of them.
Anyone remember Creed?
No.
What?
I remember when fucking Scott Stapp made a song for the Marlins. It was
nobody remembers Scott Stapp.
That Weekend Update from 1990 something with
nobody remembers that.
Everybody also remembers Alter Bridge, because they came up again recently, because hey, what up, science. But the guitar in it as well, it's just a song that, like, it is just one of those things that, like, you expect cool like the cool dudes in the 90s, like from Seattle, to be making. Like, that's sort of what you expect. It's still kind of cool. And then the somber end of All Night is great. The snare, for me, in this song worked overtime to make this something really kind of special.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about the opening two tracks, which were the catalyst tracks, as it were, as has been documented, which are the tracks that were dedicated to Andrew Wood, he of Mother Love Bone fame. And they're both like interesting eulogies to him, but yeah, they're completely different tracks. So Say Hello to Heaven has been like referenced quite a few times. But yeah, Reach Down goes places in a way that like you realize that like they just needed that catharsis in song form. Like the musicianship is really cool, but like the way it like conveys the necessary catharsis that they needed, and to speak on somebody that was a huge part of their lives, which was really cool. But yeah, like the whole part where just that extended just instrumental just journey, like not the band journey, but an adventure. Really great solo in there. Just the guitar work is really cool. And yeah, that part near the end where it's like just the acapella part was just like had such a cool impact. I really think Wooden Jesus is a cool like personality to it. And like it has a really cool vibe. And I just like the way Chris Cornell sings in that particular one was a little bit out of place, but just worked in really well. But yeah, and like For World was cool because it's like it's obviously it uses it's like the lyrics say they're singing about a prisoner, but like you can almost like really like it's one of those early glimpses of people metaphoricizing their deep depressions. So it's like which is this and that Green Day song everyone assumes is about masturbation is being a song about actually, oh wait, this is about crippling depression. Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think those tracks just really stand out, and it's hard to it's such a cool journey to get into some of those like specific songs. But let's bring it back around the horn and talk about some conclusive thoughts. David, what would be your conclusive thoughts on this album as a whole?
This album and this project is kind of a double tragedy, because it was born out of the passing of Andrew Wood, who was Chris Cornell's roommate at the time of his passing, and along with being a part of Mother Love Bone, two of the members of Pearl Jam would form Pearl Jam after Mother Love Bone ended. But then in 2017, these guys got back together for a bit and did a few shows as Temple of the Dog. And then, unfortunately, we lost Chris Cornell. But something beautiful can be brought out of tragedy, and that's what this album is. There's some damn good music all over this album, and there's a lot of really talented dudes, and Eddie Vedder. And it goes places that you wouldn't expect from dudes from Seattle to do, but it works, and it works damn well. It works really, really well, and I recommend it. I'm just kidding. I actually like Pearl Jam, so that was a joke.
I like that. Drew, how would you conclude on this album?
One, I would conclude by saying I don't think I've ever heard a diss quite as eloquently put as David just did there. Hot damn. But no, this is an album that I think like you said, it's something beautiful can be brought about by hardship. It's something that is one of the worst things that you have to experience in life. Like, death is something that we all will be faced with in one way, shape, or form. And especially when it's something like this, where it's one of your best friends, it's someone you're creating art with. Like, there's a brotherhood in that is something that is profound. You and another person bearing your soul for something, and then like doing that together is something that's really crazy. And they did, and it's something that they will always have, or they always had that until, well, we know. But there is something really cool that can be done with that. And I think that, like, it's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. Out of darkness sometimes comes light. I said at the beginning, grunge is usually not my thing. This is 100% something that, like, I can fully get behind as something that if anybody listens to this podcast and has never heard this before, I hope they would go out and look for it now, because it's something that's really freaking cool.
Yeah, the brotherhood of a regional music scene is something that is very like the siblinghood, the familyhood, like a regional music scene is something that's like is pretty deep, especially when you're all working to build something, and which is what the Seattle scene, especially or those before, because this we're talking about before, like 91, 92, where like that was just it just became a a factory to pump out music for the masses, but like it was a bunch of like friends that had bands that they all played together in Seattle and stuff like that. So the emotion of that, it wasn't the it was not a rarity going forward. The tragic passing of somebody in the scene, but you can see where it's still an emotional experience, especially for an emotional person like Chris Cornell, which we all know, we all saw the evidence of that. It is interesting what beautiful things can come from such tragic moments, and how that could spawn even things that aren't really specifically about that grief. Because it started with a couple songs about Andy, then spawned into, oh, I'm gonna make this different style of music with these guys that play a different style of music, and like almost like just in playing these different ideas in different style, I'm paying tribute to him in that, which is kind of like a really cool way, not just making a sad song about someone, but like in the way you create and in the way you do, you without directly grieving that person, you're paying tribute to that person, which is really cool. And I think that's an interesting like glimpse into the mental process, as it were. But yeah, Brett. Last but not least, how would you conclude on this album as a whole?
I mean, this was Seattle before, Nirvana's MTV explosion. This is before, they put Weezer on Windows 95 install discs. This was before, this was before the genre was even a solid thing, which is neat. It's a little like slice of time, because it was a long time ago. These guys are like in their 50s if they're around, and it's a fun thing where there's a finite amount of Chris Cornell that I can bring to the show, but I'm glad that we dug through this, because I like. I
Please
remember,
never stop, Brett.
I mean, I
don't
remember,
ever think twice about it.
I remember like being in people's like cars and flipping through their like CD sleeves and seeing the cover to this album like a million times, and like never listening to it front to back, just I knew it was in there. It's kind of neat now in the year of our Lord 2020 to listen to like a thing that happened and then went away.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even a thing until after it was a thing.
Yeah.
But
Well, after other things
it's
were a
what we got.
thing, and then the record label was like, "Hey, we have this.
We need to put a sticker on it that says
like,
the people of Pearl Jam."
Yeah, it's like, oh crap, we have this supergroup on our table.
They accidentally had a hit on their hands.
Yeah, this is from another time. People from this time are walking around now going, well, actually, I'm Gen X, at people. It's like an interesting age.
I was born in 64, not, Okay, boomer.
Okay. You ain't gotta be a baby boomer to be a boomer. But that aside, those are our thoughts on Temple of the Dogs.
And if anyone ever wants to karaoke, I will happily do the Chris Cornell parts with you.
Mm-hmm. Shout him out. Find him at your local anime cons karaoke bar.
He charges by the octave.
Yes. He'll hook you up. You got the hookup. Yeah, those are our thoughts on Temple of the Dogs. Temple of the Dog. Now we get into the main event of the evening. We get into our haiku reviews. The moment we've all been waiting for. Let's get down to it. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Hakumuro numero uno. Let's get it. David, what is your haiku?
Cornell at his peak. Soul sprinkled all over this. I think Andrew's proud.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what is your haiku?
Somehow missed it, but glad I got to live through beautiful grieving.
Mm-hmm. My haiku, grief-fueled supergroup, a plethora of talent, odd and iconic. Brett, finally, what is your haiku?
Another excuse to bring more of Chris Cornell. 2 picks in a row.
Yeah. Swish.
You can totally bring some Soundgarden, Brett. I won't mind at all.
Yeah. I mean, but we've done the Soundgarden that I would bring.
Yeah. We're gonna revisit
my opinions haven't changed enough on that album.
It's on the record. Bring it back. Play it back. Yeah. Those are our thoughts on Temple of the Dogs. Temple of the Dog. Go check it out on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers is the home game. Do your due diligence and your due diligence, as it were. On that Spotify playlist will be next week's record, and it, barring anything like a guest or special episode, it comes back to me. And I'm gonna have an interesting album. I'm going back. We're gonna do Korean music again.
Surprise.
Kpoppodcast.com. Everybody listen to Hal Yuchuku.
An artist that we discussed on that show, very cool, young, independent indie musician, kind of blew up a couple of years ago in Korea with her group, Sesonyeon. I ended up finding out about her when kind of like seeing the hype around this, around her solo release, her solo album, and ended up utterly enjoying like the couple of the songs that came out, and then listened to the album, and it was a plethora of diverse sounds, which is really cool. So we're gonna listen to an artist by the name of Soyoon, with her album Soyoon. We're bringing back we're keeping it with the self-titles all around. Otherwise, if you're looking for it, it's stylized as Soyoon, and it's written like SpongeBob meme format. So That's the one that you look out for. But yeah, look forward to that next week. But that'll be next week. Hopefully, this will be this week. And you can, of course, find us all over the internet. David is at Call Me DJM. Drew is at XDruciferX. Brett is at HeyBBBird, HIBBIT.
H to the I to the BBITY, B to the I to the BBARD.
I'm from the Emma. Quickly, humpback, what about that? That's a Def Jam fight for New York. I'm PD Rave. I'm at PD Rave. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Rebelli.net for the Sonelli shows. Rebelli TV on YouTube and other places. Subscribe, like, share. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, bunch of places. Subscribe, like, share, hit the bell, slap the walrus, spank the monkey, do all the things. Until next time.
Whoa!
Hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Rebelli Podcast, baby.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.